I remember vividly my first time playing Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Just 11 years old at the time, I'd been very fortunate to get my hands on it, thanks mostly to a local shop doing a terrible job of age verification, and within 30 minutes or so of starting it, I knew I was playing a stone cold classic. To this day, Brad Vickers' warning to Jill Valentine that something was coming for them still gives me the willies.
Listen, he's coming for us. We're both gonna die.
What are you saying?
You'll see. He's after STARS members. There's no escape.
His death soon after at the hands of Nemesis was awesome and gruesome in equal measure. And when Nemesis crashed through a police station window hot on my tail, I jumped so hard I felt my soul leave my body. And all that occurred in just the first 30 minutes or so. The rest of Resident Evil 3 didn't disappoint either. It's an action-orientated schlock horror showstopper, which keeps a relentless pace for the entirety of its runtime. Fast forward some 19 years, and Resident Evil 2's long-awaited remake hit store shelves. While some of the original's features Capcom seemingly struggled to implement much, or indeed at all, such as proper A and B scenarios as well as the zapping system, in gameplay terms, the transition from fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds to a third-person perspective was buttery smooth. In an instant, exploring the Raccoon City Police Department became something new and exciting for the first time in a long time, and I felt all the same emotions I'd felt 20 years prior all over again as I crept through the station's hallways, terrified of what might be around every corner. When Capcom announced Resident Evil 3's remake then, I nearly lost my mind. I adore Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil before it, but 3 had always been the PlayStation entry closest to my heart. The chance to relive every beautiful, brilliant moment of it, but with brand spanking new graphics and all the other innovations modern gaming has given us, left me salivating like a dog at dinner. A year later, I finally got my grubby mitts on what was without doubt one of my most anticipated games of all time, and then 4 or 5 hours later, I was done with it, and I didn't know what to think. It would be remiss of me to say that Resident Evil 3's remake is a bad game through and through, because it's not. In fact, there are a fair few positives. Its graphics are gorgeous, and while a massive technical leap over the original was of course expected, that doesn't make its best scenes any less striking. Your first tentative steps out onto the streets of Raccoon City after escaping Jill's apartment, the drained Demos' maze-like nest, the hunters tearing apart a patient in a blood-drenched hospital. So much of the game is a veritable feast for the eyes. Likewise, its soundtrack is excellent and a huge improvement over 2's, which was practically non-existent. Most of the remake's characters are also near pitch perfect, with Jill and Umbrella mercenary Carlos Oliveira being particularly well reimagined.
Carlos, Tyrell, you have your orders. You need to go back out into the city and find Nathaniel Bart.
This isn't the last ride out of town, right?
Do not worry. Once the civilians are safe, the train will be back.
It's alright, you go on ahead. I'm not gonna die on you, leave you in a cold, cruel, Carlosless world.
Okay.
UBCS squad leader Nikolai Jinoviev, I haven't a Scooby-Doo if I've pronounced that correctly, does veer too far towards being a pantomime villain for my liking.
Come on, don't look at me like that, alright? I'm not infected.
No,
No, wait, please!
What the fuck?
He was infected.
He might have been infected.
Oh, stars, this soft. No wonder so many of you dead.
However, I did somewhat expect that, considering how cartoonishly malevolent Capcom made Police Chief Brian Irons in Resident Evil 2's remake. When Capcom slams their foot on the brakes and actually allows you time to explore, primarily during the city streets and hospital sections, the remake's gameplay truly feels like the modern Resident Evil 3 most of us were hoping for too. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that the hospital portion especially is actually vastly improved over that featured in the original. original. Finally, the original's action-focused gameplay is present and correct as well. A big part of that was the dodge mechanic, a feature exclusive to 3 back in the PlayStation days, and that is markedly improved too, with it being much easier for anyone and everyone to begin dodging, ducking, dipping, diving and dodging around zombies and other assorted nasties with relative ease. The big issue, and it is a stinking big issue, is that in similar fashion to 2's remake, Capcom seemingly lacked a robust understanding of what made 3 so unique in the first place. Indeed, once all of the good stuff I just mentioned has been put to one side and I think solely about what's missing, my little British heart begins to break. There are 3 key areas where Capcom really managed to balls things up: the live selection mechanic and associated choice-based exploration, its elements of randomisation, and the way Nemesis is handled. I'll touch on each in turn, starting with how Resident Evil 3's remake changes based on the decisions you make at various points during the story, like the original so often did. Just kidding, I can't, because it doesn't. If you look up the word streamlined in the dictionary, there is a picture of 3's remake sitting next to it. At no point are you given any agency whatsoever in deciding how events will unfold or in what order you'll visit any locations. From beginning to end, you are shepherded from place to place, from moment to moment, with no choice but to follow Capcom's extraordinarily rigid script. Each and every playthrough will be nigh on identical, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to change that. By comparison, the original is positively overflowing with opportunities to make 3's story your own. There are a couple of examples I want to highlight, and while I do, it's worth bearing in mind that these are only 2 of many, and that I've not even mentioned all the possible permutations just this pair has. After escaping the police station, you need to find 2 gems in order to progress, which involves visiting 2 locations, the press office and the CAF. Whichever you choose to visit first will host a live selection event involving Nemesis and Carlos.
Oh no, it's him!
While the other will contain one of the gems. Depending on how you choose to tackle whichever situation you find yourself in, you'll either meet Carlos at the gas station later and Nikolai at the sales office, or vice versa, with entirely different scenes playing out at each. A choice with even greater significance occurs later on. Towards the end of the game, you're cornered by Nemesis on a bridge and can choose to either push him off or jump off yourself. If you push him off, Nikolai's death is a brief one at the hands, or should I say tentacles, of Nemesis.
That's great, except I have no intention of contributing to your retirement fund.
If you jump off, the next time you meet Nikolai, he'll be in a helicopter, and the course of action you select can either lead to him flying off or a boss battle. I could sit and chat about this side of things all day, but I reckon that's enough of a taster that you hopefully understand how delicious a choice-based smorgasbord this aspect of the original is. It is, in my view, the game's beating heart. You can play 1999's rendition of Resident Evil 3 once, twice, 3 times, or maybe even more, and witness a different chain of events each time depending on how you approach any given situation. You only need to play the remake once, and you've seen everything it has to offer. I remember there being sentiment prior to its release that the live selection mechanic is outdated, and a game forcing pauses for menus is stupid. But if that is the difference maker between variety and monotony, sign me up for a lovely long menu pause, please and thank you. Live selection and the other choices you're able to make, such as the order you visit certain locations in, are one layer of replayability, but there is another. There is an absolutely ridiculous list of different enemy arrangements, so many you'd need a 20-minute odd video just to outline them all, which means that even if you visit locations in the same order and make the same choices during live selection, you still need to stay frosty. During my playthroughs for this video, I got a really nice mix of different encounters across them. Take these 2 considerations consecutive areas in the park. My first playthrough, I ran across zombies in this watery area, followed by a gaggle of hunter beaters in the next. During my second, hunter gammas burst from the water and gave me a bit of a fright, before I was forced to dispatch a few pooches after. There are even unique encounters with the living you might miss too, such as this one with a poor civilian, who you may later find as dead as a dodo. Add to this item randomisation too. Most changes will be small, a gunpowder in a different place here, a herb missing there, but there are one or two which are pretty massive, such as whether you get the Magnum or grenade launcher from the STARS office in the RCPD. At this point, I'd love to be able to say that the remake has its own unique twist on the formula, or has any randomisation whatsoever, but it doesn't. It has sweet Fanny Adams. Again, a second playthrough will offer nothing not present during a first. Finally, we get to my boy Nemesis, and man alive did Capcom do him dirty. You might be fooled into thinking he'll be an even more active presence in the remake than he was in the original, thanks to him smashing through Jill's apartment wall mere minutes into the game.
Hello?
Jill, are you okay?
Brad, is that you?
Listen, you gotta get out of there.
What are you talking about?
I don't have time to explain. You gotta get out of there right now.
Alright, let me grab my...
But then it's cutscenes and QuickTime events for the foreseeable future. After clearing the power station of creepy crawlies, he does become a more active presence, stalking you all the way to the railway office and then chasing you back to the subway after, but that's as far as his non-scripted presence goes for the rest of the game. Also, he seems to just appear from the sky like some kind of messed up Spider-Man, and it's just the stupidest looking thing I've ever seen. In a game based on a game which was centered around being hunted by a hulking nightmare, you're hardly hunted at all. His name is the subtitle of the original, for goodness sake. It's called Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. So what Capcom were thinking when they decided to neuter him beyond all recognition, I'll never know. But hey, at least we get a series of by the numbers boss fights right. We even get to do one of them twice, first outside the clock tower and then again towards the end of Nest 2. It is also mind-boggling to me that Capcom managed to get Mr. X spot on in 2's remake, but instead of building on those foundations, they went in completely the opposite direction. Mr. X is more Nemesis than Nemesis ends up being, which leaves a particularly sour taste considering that's the polar opposite of how they were handled in the originals, where Mr. X was very scripted and Nemesis, while still scripted, felt a million times more dynamic. He doesn't even hang around for long in his most interesting form either, where Nemesis in the original slowly sustained more and more damage, first losing his coat thing, then sprouting tentacles and finally ending up looking like a wad of silly putty. In the remake he transforms from normal Nemesis to dog thing and stays like that until the game's final encounter. While the three features I've just mentioned are my major gripes, there are other issues I'd be remiss not to mention too. Capcom's obsession with streamlining and the removal of the live selection mechanic leads to a secondary problem, segmentation. The original was segmented too, granted, no one environment comes anywhere close to being as complex as the Spencer Mansion or the Raccoon City Police Department, but you move through areas in a logical order and there's only ever one cut, when Jill gets infected and you search for a cure as Carlos.
I've been infected by the virus, haven't I?
Hey! Take it easy.
I'm okay. Don't feel any pain. But that's what bothers me. If I can't feel anything, then what does that mean?
Don't give up, Jill. I'll take care of you. Whatever you do, don't let that virus beat you.
The remake jumps backwards and forwards between characters and places a lot more, and while you could argue it makes for a slicker production, I think bouncing here, there and everywhere ruins any sense of pacing. Several environments have either been replaced or nigh on completely changed too, the three biggest losses being the park, the clock tower and the dead factory. The park is gone full stop. As mentioned earlier, we do get to see the clock tower in the remake from the outside, but that's all you get. Well, that and one of the most generic boss fights ever, which I'd again like to remind you is for all intents and purposes done twice. The Dead Factory is replaced by Nest 2, which is in no way a worthy successor. It's the lab from the Resident Evil 2 remake all over again, except worse in nearly every regard. Puzzle solving is a thing of the past too. The writing was on the wall in this regard to some degree. While Resident Evil 2 had a few light puzzles, it wasn't exactly Christmas, and Resident Evil 3 basically does away with them entirely, unless you class finding lock combinations in files as puzzles, which I don't, because even my dog could solve those, and I don't even own a dog. It's a great shame because they're a core part of the Resident Evil experience, and the original had several really good ones that I think could have easily been moved across to the remake. I want to conclude this video by first apologising for being such a negative Nelly. 1999's Resident Evil 3 is an amazing experience anyone with a passing interest in horror games should play, and I think it's really important to recognise loudly what made it so special, given there will be a whole generation of gamers out there who have only played the vastly inferior remake. If you're one of those who hasn't played the original and enjoyed the remake, and you think you can handle some of the older Resident Evil's quirks, I implore you to grab a copy and give it a go as soon as you possibly can. It may not be quite as flashy as its modern equivalent, but it has untold depth in comparison, and when all is said and done, like a zombie, I'll always go for brains over beauty. Thanks for watching the video, boys, girls and stars members. If you had a frighteningly good time, do consider liking, subscribing and letting me know what you thought of Resident Evil 3's remake, and hopefully we'll meet again soon.